All right. Greetings. I hope all is well for everyone in such difficult times. My name is Evando Thompson, and I'm a student journalist at Seton Hall who will moderate several talks upon religion for Seton Hall's Institute of Communication and Religion. This afternoon, we have Dr. Patrick Manning from our School of Theology. How are you, Dr. Manning?
I'm doing well, Evando. Good to be talking with you.
And Dr. Manning, could you please give the audience a brief background of yourself for us? I know you went to Notre Dame and you have a couple degrees from them. So just can you talk about yourself and how you ended up at Seton Hall?
Sure, yeah. I've wanted to be a teacher for a long, long time. I was very fortunate when I was in high school to go to a school that had an excellent theology department, some teachers who I really looked up to, and I just really loved those conversations that we had in those theology classes, and so that kind of inspired me, planted a seed. And after I finished up at Notre Dame, I did a Catholic service through teaching program called the Alliance for Catholic Education. It's kind of like a Catholic version of Teach for America.
Okay.
And so I taught high school through them for a couple of years, studied education. But during that time, I got a sort of a bird's eye view of education across the country, because people in the program were sent all around the country, different states, different places, and that kind of inspired me again and had me setting my sights. It gave me a feeling that I was being called to do something for the sake of Catholic education beyond my classroom. So that's sort of what sent me back to grad school, studied more theology, studied more education, and then was fortunate enough to end up at Seton Hall, where I get to teach practical theology, including about religious education, and a bit with the undergrads as well, teaching a journey once a year.
Awesome. It sounds like you are very passionate about what you're doing. It sounds like you like your career, so I'm very glad to hear that, and I hope to be in that position one day for sure. Today we will discuss around the theme centered of finding and sharing inspiration amidst crisis. Before we begin, is there anything that you would like to mention, Dr. Manning?
No, I'd say let's dig in.
All right. And I know you're quite the journalist yourself. I did see that you wrote for the Catholic publication called Young Millennial back in 2017. And I want to dive into something you wrote recently for Seton Hall's website, which are the 5 tips for finding God amidst crisis. Right off the bat, you state that a lot of people believe God to be absent during these times as they search for him. You say that your tips are not quote-unquote tips per se because, understandably, there's no quick fix for a pandemic. Can you just elaborate on how you formulated those 5?
Sure. And part of it is Seton Hall asked for faculty to contribute what we could to speaking out of our area of expertise to help people in the midst of the crisis. Mm-hmm. And they suggested 5. And so, I mean, there's, I could have written 3, I could have written 20 probably, but these are 5 that seemed somewhat important to me, and these emerged out of a lot of my own research and reading and sort of personal practice in the background, but more recently these have come out of conversations with colleagues and friends and family, and just talking with people about what they're experiencing in the midst of the pandemic, and just kind of my own experience, and trying to make sense of things and really craft a new lifestyle that helps us to adapt to the situation that we find ourselves in.
And the first tip or that you offer is to find unique ways that God may be working with us in this crisis. And I just want to talk about like the phrasing of or the wording of something that you use. You said turning catastrophe in a cause for celebration. So I know a lot of times in Catholic teaching or in Christian teaching in general, the higher ups, they always say God, serves us in mysterious ways. Like we find different avenues to which, there can be, a higher power that's helping us out. So can you just elaborate on why you chose to use those words?
Yeah, I mean, for the Christian faith, this is the story of human history. Is that God has a way of bringing good out of suffering, bringing good out of evil, including the evil that we sort of inflict upon ourselves. We're now in the midst of Easter time, and this is what we celebrated at Easter: is that human beings had turned away from God. In fact, we believe that human beings actually killed God on the cross.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's kind of hard to imagine something more catastrophic or terrible than that. And yet it was God used precisely that. God used precisely the cross in order to bring about the salvation of the world. And so we could if this was a 100-part series, we could go through all of Scripture and kind of look at all the times that God has done similar things and look at world history and do the same. But this is how God works, and so it's I'm not at all going out on a limb to say that even though this feels like a crisis, and it is, and a lot of people are really suffering, we have ample reason to believe that God is going to be able to bring good out of it. The question is, do we have the eyes to see it? Are we able to recognize what might be happening?
And I know for the second point, you did offer this as a time for Sabbath rest, and I know sort of maybe like my generation, or the millennial, like people in high school, people in college, students, they're sort of moving towards maybe the more agnostic mindset, or like not really valuing religion as maybe the 70s or the 80s did. And in the second point, you wrote that Sabbath day, like although a day of rest was once commonly observed in the United States, today many of us treat it as just another day to get things done. So you think now that people are in their homes a lot more, obviously everybody's social distancing and there's stay-at-home orders, do you think now people will have that time to kind of reflect and seek God a little bit more?
Well, it's for sure that people have more time, and by that I mean a lot of people. Of course, we have our emergency workers and our essential workers who are many of them working more than they ever did before, and so this is not a time for rest and relaxation for them. But for many of the rest of us, we're not doing our daily commute. We have fewer meetings on our schedules, and so we do find ourselves, many of us, with more time. But that is the question: is how we're going to use the time. We could very easly just go on a Netflix binge like we have never done before and just try and fill up that time, or we can take it as an invitation to spend our time very differently than we have before, to really take this opportunity to do the kinds of things that gives rest to our souls. So things like actually moving through our day at a slower pace. It makes me glad to look outside, and I see a lot more people walking and riding bikes than we typically do. So that's a wonderful thing.
Mm-hmm.
But also to take more time for maybe reading and writing and reflection and longer conversations, deeper conversations, and even prayer, as I suggest later on in the article.
Yeah, I kind of want to go to what I thought was the most touching part of this the tips guide. The fifth point where you said the greatest human desire is to be loved. Pandemic did disrupt many of our life, but it can't and will not stop us from communicating our love to one another. So I personally feel that this time is definitely a time where we need to strengthen those bonds with the people that are closest to us, touching our loved ones. So how do you think this will positively encourage that and induce us to, have more time to spend with the people that we live with?
Yeah, yeah. Again, in the article, I use language like invitation and opportunity because it's not a given that we're going to use this time well. So it's on the one hand, many of us might find this to be difficult if we're kind of in close quarters with our family members. There's a saying, familiarity breeds contempt, and even for those of us who are well intentioned, it can be tough when you're right on top of each other and you're seeing too much of each other day in and day out. I haven't checked this out, but a friend mentioned to me that in China they're actually seeing, after the quarantine was lifted, that there was sort of a spike in the number of people filing for divorce.
Wow.
Sort of too much time together. And again, I hope I'm not spreading misinformation. You can fact check me on that, but this is what I'd heard. But this is the danger, that we don't use the time well. So how do we use it well? I think even as we're isolated from one another, it's so fortunate that Evando, you and I right now, we're talking across many state lines, having a conversation thanks to this technology. And here at Seton Hall, we're able to. A lot of our faculty have really risen up to the challenge to keep moving on with their classes, and students are doing the best they can with it. And we have the same benefit when it comes to our families. And I'll say for myself that this time's been a blessing, in that I've had conversations with a bunch of people who I usually don't get to talk to, and people are just more available right now. So it's a real opportunity to spend that quality time with one another, because one of my other areas of research is the science of happiness and how that interfaces with the Christian faith. And one of the most significant findings to come out of that research is that our relationships are the most important thing when it looks at our health and our well-being. So it's a real time, it's a real opportunity to invest in our relationships.
And just to go off of relationships, I want to talk about the relationship that Catholics have with the church, because I know I was on campus for about right around when we had to evacuate. So like right before like all students had to leave, that's when around the time that I left, I stayed a little bit longer. But I did notice that there wasn't any masses going on campus, of course, but they were offering people to kind of go online and try to still have that connection with the service and things like that. I just want to see, like, how have those been administered, and what's different?
It's a lot of our the people working in the church. They've had a scramble like we have in the academic world to figure out how to minister to people. My wife actually works in a local parish, and so they've, as many parishes have, they've been live streaming masses and live streaming other events, reaching out to people on social media. Pope Francis, he had this really remarkable address a number of weeks ago, this Urbi et Orbi address, when he was speaking and offering a blessing to the city of Rome and the whole world. And one of his final statements in that address was to be open to the Holy Spirit, and to make room for creativity in our lives, but within the church as well. So it's, things are, even after things more or less go back to normal, I don't think things are ever going to quite go back to the way they were after this pandemic. And I think Pope Francis is putting out that challenge, that when we go back, that we make the challenge a positive one, that we've had to adapt on the fly to living in isolation and trying to carry on life online for many things. There's an opportunity here to think about how we can better connect with each other, how we can be more creative in the way that the church reaches out to people, reaches out to the world, serves the needs of the world. So there's an opportunity here if we look to take advantage of it.
And I don't know if you got the chance to see it, but South Orange did make national news headlines with the way that one of its churches held their service. They had like pictures to represent the place in which the normal churchgoers would sit. What do you think about that? Like, is that
I did see that.
positive way to kind of inspire people? Like, hey, we're still in this together. That is it. Do you think that is something that should still go on everywhere?
Yeah, absolutely. It's I was just having a conversation with my wife, who, as I said, works in a church right before we started this interview, and I was saying something to this effect, that we all find right now, so many of us find ourselves in isolation, and we're experiencing how difficult that can be to be cut off from one another. And so I love to see things like that. Yeah, I did see that about the pictures of parishioners in the pews of the church. I thought that was,
it's cool.
Was wonderful. It's great to see the way that the different churches are. They're trying to create spaces online for people to hang out and have some kind of fellowship and talk with each other and be together. I know like some churches are. It's not just the priest on the camera the whole time. They're having parishioners film themselves at home, and to welcome each other to the services and to build that kind of community online. So these are all great things that we're doing for the people who are normally in the pews. I would love to see the church take advantage of this moment and recognize, well, we're all feeling this isolation right now, but there are some in our society who have been practicing involuntary social distancing well before this. The poor, the elderly, the immigrants, the people on the margins of our society who are cut off in some ways because of their situation. I would love to see some of this creativity that's being exercised right now employed to reach out to those people who are isolated, even when there isn't a pandemic going on.
And I guess a lot of things seem so repetitive in the times of this crisis. So maybe as to offer, some guidance for listeners that may be Catholic or just deeply religious in general. What's a day in the life of Dr. Manning and his wife like?
It's a good question. I mean, and I'll try and generalize, so it's not so specific to us. But I'll just say to start, I've heard a lot of comments about right now it's like Groundhog Day. So many people say people lose track of what day it is. Every day just kind of feels like the same. And I have to say that has not been my experience. And I feel that I partly have my Christian faith to thank for that, because one of the great aspects of the Christian life is that life is not just flat. It's not just one day after another. That we celebrate different seasons. So right now we've just come out of this season of Lent, and now we're experiencing this time of Easter. And so kind of moving from this period when we were encouraged to reflect on our sinfulness, on the suffering in the world, on our need for salvation, into Easter, when we now get to sort of celebrate the joy of what God has done in our lives. So we move through these different seasons, and even within the day, I think a lot of people know that Muslims, observant Muslims, one of the five pillars is that they they pray 5 times a day. But actually, there's a similar thing in the Christian tradition. There's this thing called the Liturgy of the Hours, where Christians are encouraged to pray at these different times throughout the day. So as to, the way one priest recently explained it to some of us is that it's like if you picture telephone wires or something being supported by those posts or those poles every so often. It's kind of those moments of prayer throughout the day that give some structure to it, so that to kind of mark the passage of time and give a rhythm to life, so that it doesn't feel like the hours or the days just wearing on.
Mm-hmm.
So you asked about me specifically. So without going into too much boring detail, because I'm an academic and I spend a lot of time in books and at a desk, which is not interesting to anyone. But typically, I wake up. We have our little kids. So we get them up and dressed and fed. I take some time for prayer before I get to work. And then I'll have my classes, or I'll have class prep to do, or something else. I'll break in the middle of the day, try and have lunch with the kids. Again, have just a shorter time for prayer before I kind of continue on. Do some more work in the afternoon, and then hopefully in the late afternoon or evening, I'll go for a bike ride or go for a jog with my daughter, kind of get out, get some exercise. We have dinner together, and then the normal sort of bath and bedtime routine with the kids. I take some more time for prayer, and then kind of have an hour or so to just kind of hang out and talk and spend some time with my wife before we turn in.
You know what I liked about the whole set of this? It wasn't boring at all for me, but what I really appreciate was that your day seemed structured, and I think you were saying that with the hours of liturgy, with the praying in Catholic faith, as most people would think that Muslims are the only ones that pray it multiple times a day. It's interesting because if there's structure to your day, then maybe things don't seem as lost, whereas you're just rambling trying to find, as you mentioned before, just a random Netflix show to binge. So it seems that if there's a little bit more structure, it can seem like you can keep track of what's going on.
Yeah, I do. I think it's really helpful for us.
And can you just, because I know you did at the beginning, you said you could have wrote 3, you could have wrote 20. Can you just mention a few more tips that you didn't maybe put on this list that could have went?
Oh boy. I don't know. I might have to think some more because these 5 came together for me pretty easily once I sat down to work on it, because I think the main things that I felt were important to say were one, just to be on the lookout for what good might come out of this situation, and to be honest, we might not recognize a lot of that until the thing is over.
Mm-hmm.
We tend to see things more clearly after the fact. But I also wanted to offer some practical advice coming out of the Christian tradition. So these things about connecting with other people, about spending that time in prayer, about taking the time that we need to rest. This is nothing new. This is nothing that I'm making up. These are very traditional Christian practices that are deeply embedded in the tradition. I guess if maybe I were to add something, the last point about connecting with people, I say a bit in there about reaching out to those who are in need. And if I had more space, maybe I would have elaborated on that. Again, earlier I mentioned Pope Francis's Urbi et Orbi address, and he had this very interesting line that he didn't really develop very much, where he said that prayer and quiet service are our victorious weapons. And I thought, I've spoken a bit about prayer, but the service is, what can we do right now? But there are things that we can do to reach out to people. We can We can call people up who we know are isolated, people who are elderly and, really locked down and limited. We could write letters.
Yeah, you do mention handwritten letters.
But also, there are places that are still taking food donations, and so, you can make a sleeve of sandwiches and drop it off. But even if you feel like there's nothing you can do concretely, I do think this is a good time for us to really be reflecting on the society in which we live, and to think about the people who are most impacted by this, and in general most impacted when our society goes through hard times. So I think that's maybe one more thing I would give more emphasis to is just to be thinking about not only trying to kind of survive and get through ourselves, but to be thinking of other people. And by the way, that's when we stop thinking about ourselves and start thinking about others, that actually tends to make us happier and less anxious about our own situation. So it actually benefits us as well.
Yeah, and that literally goes to my favorite, number 3, my favorite, just to focus on what's most important in life, and definitely helping others can help you to do that. Thank you so much for your time. All right, that will wrap it up for part 1 of the talk centered around the theme of finding and sharing inspiration amidst crisis. Thanks so much, Dr. Manning, for joining us, and I wish you the best going forward.
Thanks, Evando. My pleasure to talk with you.
All right, thank you.